Welcome to the Lizzie Borden Podcast, Episode 32. I am your host, Stephanie Corey, filling in for the late Richard Behrens, author of the Lizzie Borden Girl Detective series of mysteries. The Lizzie Borden Podcast is the only podcast entirely devoted to the study of the Borden murders of 1892, Lizzie Borden, and sometimes the history of her hometown, Fall River, Massachusetts. Produced by Nine Muses Books and Anna Behrens. Each episode explores some aspect of the mystery that is Lizzie Borden, from the origins of the doggerel, Lizzie Borden Took an Axe, to a primer on the case by noted authors and experts, including dramatic readings of Richard Behrens' Lizzie Borden Girl Detective mystery series. In this episode, we interview the curator of the Fall River Historical Society, Michael Martins, about the past few years of work at the Society and the changes yet in store. It is a fascinating look at what goes on behind the scenes at the oldest cultural institution in Fall River, now celebrating its 103rd year. Michael's long tenure as the curator affords him deep insight into the history of Fall River, the building in which more than 500,000 items are archived, and the operational day-to-day programs that make the Society the gem of the South Coast. Today, he has graciously agreed to be interviewed about the recent progress made in major structural projects to the organization, and tell us what's in store for the foreseeable future, including the remainder of this year. And now, the Lizzie Borden Podcast presents an interview with Michael Martins. Today, we're welcoming the curator of the Fall River Historical Society, Michael Martins, to talk about the goings-on, the history of the progress of the project that has kept the Society closed for the past year and a half.
Yes.
And just discovered that Michael has been the curator of the Society for 35 years now.
It goes by fast.
That's super fast.
It is.
So you know all the ins and outs of this building.
Perhaps too much so. Yes.
Yeah, but you're the perfect person then to effect the kinds of changes that have gone along here because you know all the needs of the Society in great detail.
Well, if you know the building and you know the collections, it makes it that much easier because you're familiar with the space. So,
yeah,
yes.
So, but intimately familiar with the space because you know where all the closets are, where all the bathrooms were, where all the storage spaces were, and the actual collection itself. A lot of it came in during your tenure.
Well, I mean, the collection was vast to begin with, but we have certainly added to it over the years.
So let's go back to COVID days, which is still fresh in everyone's memory, I'm sure. But that started in the country around 2019, the end of 2019. And then by 2020, there were protocols put in place where public spaces had to close, correct?
Yes. So in March of 2020, in compliance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts COVID protocols, the Historical Society had to close its building to the public. So I was the only person working here, and the rest of the staff worked from home, and we closed, which could have been absolutely devastating and was devastating for a lot of nonprofits. In a very strange sort of way, it had the reverse effect on the Historical Society. In some ways, it was a very positive thing in that it gave us the time to focus on things we would not have had the time to focus on otherwise. So what looked like it would be a disaster for the Historical Society actually worked out well thanks to a number of very generous donors.
So kind of like when you would be closed for the season and that's when you would get your writing accomplished.
Yes.
So you would write the books, like Parallel Lives was mainly written during the off seasons.
Yes.
So that's when the productivity within the organization gets really high because you have the time to devote to individual projects or a slew of projects.
Yes, because the building is closed and there are no interruptions.
So no need to worry about volunteers and tours and those kinds of things. But when that happens, you also lose revenue, right?
You do, and initially it was going to be absolutely devastating for the Historical Society. I can remember the that first board meeting, and I was at an absolute loss because I had no idea how we were going to keep the doors open without door receipts, admissions, and shop sales, etc. So
by the door open, you mean operational?
Operational, keep
Right.
the museum open to the public because we needed that revenue because we've always operated, bottom line. So fortunately, right at the beginning, we had two foundations that contacted us and said, look, we know this is going to be devastating potentially, so what do you need in order to keep your doors open?
And this was right as you're beginning your 100th year
Yes.
as a society.
Yes, we never celebrated the
We couldn't.
centennial of the Historical Society. We couldn't, so all the plans that we had, and there were many, were for naught because nothing could be done. So we had to sort of refocus and regroup very quickly. So without the unrestricted operating support that came in from private donors, I have no idea what we would have done, but we certainly would not be in the position that we're in today as an organization.
So COVID happens, you're closed since March of 2020 until you get to open again in 2020.
So the current plan is to open
No, when you were open for like 5 months for tours.
So last year in
So it's
23,
2020, 23, okay.
23, we opened spring of 23, and the first floor of the museum building was open for tours, along with the museum shop, library, and archive. And then we closed in July of 23 in order to prepare for this major infrastructure project that is now ongoing.
So while the society was closed, then was where the percolation was going on with the infrastructure
Yes.
system, which included having plans developed, commissioned,
Yes.
money for that.
Yes. It was a very lengthy process. So the projects that we've been doing really have been the culmination of a three-phase process, which started with a preservation master plan. And so we had engineers and representatives of different trades come in, along with architects. They looked at the entire infrastructure of the building and prioritized what needed to be addressed and how it should best be addressed. So that was the roadmap, and that was funded by a grant from the Manton Foundation. Taking that roadmap, we were then able to apply again to the Manton Foundation for the engineering design for the HVAC system, because this was identified as a priority in the master plan.
Because the only air conditioning was in the basement area, correct?
Yes, library and archive was the only area that we had any climatization. We did have a furnace that heated the upper part of the house, but there were not radiators that functioned in every room. There were 32, I believe, radiators in the house, and of those, only 7 were actually functioning properly.
Wow.
So there was no heat on the third floor. So all of this has now been changed.
So now you have heat throughout the building, you have air conditioning throughout the building. So those hot summer tours will be a thing of the past.
Exactly. So after we had the engineering design, we had sound numbers, and then taking those numbers, we went back to the foundation, and we were able to secure the funds in order to install the system, which was a massive project. This has been the largest and most transformative infrastructure project in the history of the organization.
Was anything ruined?
No, but that was the tricky part.
Okay.
So the engineers came in, and they knew that they had to work within certain parameters, and one was the interiors of the building are so well preserved that none of this could be touched or damaged or altered in any way. So they had to devise a system that would give us what we needed in every room. So the ability to heat, to air condition, or to heat and cool. We needed the ability for humidification, dehumidification throughout the entire structure at different levels in every room. But all of this had to be installed without doing any damage to the interior or the exterior of the structure.
So for instance, when you say different levels in every room, meaning in some rooms there's fabric collections and in some room there's painting collections.
Exactly.
So these require different levels of humidification or
Yes,
dehumidification.
for example, you would want to keep textiles cooler than you would want to keep works on canvas. So yes,
You will now have that control.
we have the ability to control all of that from one central panel.
Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Transformative. It's the most transformative project in the history of this organization. Absolutely game-changing.
So any kind of paint discoloration or installing things in walls, and that's all been renovated and taken care of? And
So it's in the
put back?
process.
Yeah.
So it's in the process. The entire collection, everything in this building had to be packed. So every picture had to come off every wall, every piece of furniture had to be moved, every piece of glass, china, silver, every manuscript, every photograph, everything had to be removed.
And how many objects are in the collection?
Over 250,000 objects. just over 50,000 photographs alone. So,
Wow.
when you count all of that material, it all had to be packed and moved safely in order to facilitate the work on the HVAC systems.
Did you come across any long lost things that you've...
We found some fascinating things. There were things I'd never seen that had been in storage so long. It was an amazing
So they've been in
process.
storage for more than 35 years is what you're saying.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So some things were removed from the building and put in a storage facility.
In storage facilities, in various vaults, in the building, in other buildings, and we kept what we could in the building, and we have to work around that.
And the library was wrapped up like cellophane, like everything was sealed.
Everything that stayed in place had to be completely sealed. So it was every box was wrapped individually, every book was wrapped, and then everything was double wrapped in sheet plastic.
And that's just for dust and
that was just
atmospheric
for dust.
damage.
Yes.
Because of the work that was being
Yes.
done. Paper put on the floors. And
Well, you see, carpeting had to be removed in most rooms. Every lighting fixture had to come down. Every window treatment had to come down and be put into storage. So we had to give them basically a blank slate so that they could come in and commence
so as if
work.
you moved out of the house.
Yes.
And you had people come in and redo the house from
Yes.
the inside and
Yes.
renovate.
Yes.
Wow. So you put some things over in the Easton Tea Room.
Right. Things that, display items and things of no value were put in the Easton Tea Room. Other things were stored, elsewhere. And then the work began. So we spent a good portion of last year anticipating this project. We were able to, during the spring and summer months, pack the upper portions of the building. We closed the Historical Society to the public in July of 23, packed the first floor, and then work commenced in earnest in October of 23.
So it really didn't take that long for this high entire...
Oh, it's remarkable because we're a little more than a year, not even quite a year out since construction began, and since that time they have installed the HVAC system, but we also secured funding to do a number of other projects that have also been completed. We realized as the work was going on that there were openings in walls and floors throughout the building. So that furnished a unique opportunity to get other work done that would be prohibitive if we were open. For example, something else that was identified in the master plan, the preservation master plan, was the building needed to be rewired. So since we had chases and openings throughout the building, it made sense to obtain the funding to rewire the entire structure. So at the same time HVAC was going on, we had the entire building electrically rewired. All of the old wiring has been removed and replaced, so all of the infrastructure is brand new.
Wow.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, totally amazing.
It worked out well because the electrical contractors who were working on the HVAC system became sort of intimately aware of this building and, all the nuances and the anomalies. And so because of that, we were able to use their firm and hired them through another grant to rewire the building because they were here anyway, were running wires, knew the building, so it made sense to use them.
Wow. So you've got other projects happening while they're going about their business. So you have the day-to-day operations of the society still in operation.
Yes. We
so
continued,
people came back from home into the building after COVID protocols.
Yes. And the offices operated during this whole period, sometimes, working under tents of plastic, but yes, we did continue to.
I remember those pictures.
Yeah.
You almost had to saran wrap your staff.
Pretty much. I mean, it was, I still cannot access most of my files unless they're electronic. I have no idea where they are.
So you've got the shop has been redone, redesigned, reconfigured.
The shop has been completely refigured. And again, this sort of furnished the optimum time to get some of this work done because we have a blank slate. You might as well maximize that ability, maximize the time, and use it.
I'd say that you maximize the
We tried.
time.
We've been trying to.
So you're moving your offices up, the business offices up to the second floor, and so the shop will be only on the first floor.
The shop will only be on the first floor.
For its easier access.
It's easier access. It's just much safer. It makes a lot more sense.
But you did this thing with the walls so that you increase the space.
We maximize the space in the shop. It's been designed specifically for that purpose, but of course anything we do has to be reversible. We cannot do anything that permanently alters the interior of the structure.
But the shop used to be the kitchen of the building?
Originally it was the kitchen, and the plan is eventually to take it back to that. When that time comes, then we simply remove the slat wall that's been installed on the walls, and the kitchen goes back to what it originally was.
You had to plan ahead for
we've
all
been
of this.
juggling a lot of balls for a long time, and perhaps have dropped a few, but they bounced back up, so we're okay.
That's just like gargantuan. Really.
Massive project, but at the same time, there were other things that we were able to do. So, for example, all of the chandeliers, all of the lighting fixtures in the house had to come down. So since they're down, it now furnishes the optimum time to have them conserved or restored and rewired. So we had to obtain the funding to have all of that done. At the same time, all the window treatments are down, so you might as well have all the windows in the building restored from the inside, which we have done. And if you're doing that, then you might as well install interior storms to make the HVAC system that much more efficient. It's the optimum time to do it, but you have to find the funding to do that. Thus far, we've been successful in doing all of those things.
You want to name some of these donors that have helped out with this renovation process?
So we've been fortunate. We've been very fortunate because donors have given us and supported us with unrestricted operating support, but they've also funded various projects. So we've had major funding from the Manton Foundation. We've had major funding from the Charlton Charitable Trusts, from the 27 Foundation, the Massachusetts Office of Travel and Tourism, and then a number of very generous private donors.
And in the meantime, you're still expanding the endowment and having endowment events and raising funds for the endowment for the society.
So that's the other thing that we're doing. So in late 2019, just before COVID broke, the society was planning an endowment campaign with the goal of raising a $5 million endowment to support the Historical Society, invested funds, income only. We were very fortunate. We had an anonymous donor who contributed $500,000, a cash donation, to form the nucleus of that endowment. And the caveat was that it had to be matched dollar for dollar. That first $500,000 gift had to be matched, so now you have the first $1 million for an endowment. That happened in late September, early October of 2019. We were working on that. We had another foundation that said, okay, we want you to succeed, so we will help you with a campaign consultant because you definitely need direction when you're trying to raise funds at that level. And so we had a grant that brought in a consultant. And then in March of 2020, the state shut everyone down because of COVID. We still very quietly were able to make that match. And so, yes, we've been very quietly sort of behind the scenes working on that endowment campaign, and we are now more than halfway to the goal.
And also redid the website. It's a completely new
The
look.
website has been redone, and there are, a number of things that are going to be added to that. So it's been, a tremendous amount of work on a variety of levels. And so people have often said, oh, are we going to do Christmas? Are we going to see trees? It's so difficult to explain to people what's been going on here and how much work has been accomplished in such a short period of time. But we're also talking about grant dollars for infrastructure in excess of $2 million, which is major.
Mm-hmm. Membership is vital still.
Our members have been wonderful. They've supported us through the whole process. And so I think most people get it. They understand that it might be inconvenient to not come into the shop. Maybe it's, inconvenient at Christmas not to, come and look at the nice Christmas trees. The flip side is what's more important, and obviously it's collections and infrastructure.
And long-term viability.
So the heat, the dust from opening windows, all of this, the cold in the winter, all of this was detrimental to the collections. So now we can control that ambient environment and have an interior at the level that we need to have it at for collections preservation, but also for the comfort of visitors and staff. So, the rooms on the second floor that had to be closed because it was so hot in August, those days are behind us.
Back to what I was saying about membership. The society functions on a membership basis. So becoming a member of the society is very important to the society's survival.
And people have said, well, what are the members' benefits? Well, I like to think that the first benefit is knowing that you're helping to preserve the history of Fall River and helping to support the organization that does that, because the Historical Society is now in its 103rd year, and they have been members since 1921. So we've always been a membership-based organization. There's also a 10% discount in the shop. We had a number of travel opportunities. However, COVID changed all that. So, we did a number of trips abroad.
There's special member events.
There are member events. Again, because of COVID, a lot of that changed. Mm-hmm. As soon as we complete these infrastructure projects, then we'll be able to regroup and sort of begin to offer things that we had offered in the past, but also expand on that.
Yeah, the thing that I hear the most about is, are you going to have the concerts in the park anymore? Are you going to do the trees?
Right, and we will do all of those things.
Yeah.
But it's difficult to have
Not this
concerts
year,
on the grounds because we had dumpsters and contractors and ladders and staging, and And the flip side of that, of course, is it also takes a tremendous amount of organizational time. You have to find the funding, you have to staff the event. So it's not, let's just have a concert and then people show up. There's a lot behind the scenes, and it's impossible with a small staff to get all of that done.
Right. And with COVID, you have over 100 different volunteers that work with the society, but
Yes.
with COVID, they were also concerned about their health. So it wasn't
they were.
you could ask them to come in and volunteer for anything.
No. And of course, we had to comply with COVID protocols, but in the long run, this time has really furnished the ample time to make for a better organization. So,
what are your plans for the immediate future through the end of this year?
work is still going on in the building. I know we did a walkthrough, so you've seen a lot of it. The plan right now is to have the shop opened, we hope, by early November. So the shop will be open for the holiday season, and that will be followed by the library and archive. We will not have the house open and decorated for the Christmas season this year for a number of reasons, which you have seen, and which we've discussed, but it would be physically impossible to do any of that.
Right before COVID hit, you were working on a new gallery. Were you not the first floor?
Yes. We installed
in the front parlor.
Last year, the front room was reconfigured, and it was specifically designed for use as a gallery for rotating exhibits, which is something that we desperately wanted and needed, also identified in the master plan, but never had the funding to do. The Historical Society is both a historic house museum, but we're also a historical society, and we have to tell the story of Fall River and its history, all within the confines of this house. So we have to be able to adapt rooms without doing anything that's permanent. So we had an architectural firm come in, they designed a gallery. We installed a phenomenal lighting system, state-of-the-art, a really wonderful gallery hanging system. And this was funded by one of our members, Doug Borden, who funded it in memory of his wife.
And it is a great space.
It's a fabulous space.
It was open briefly.
So we opened the Borden Gallery. We had the Inception exhibit, the first exhibit, which was recent acquisitions. We had a opening, but it was a private opening for Doug Borden and his family and his invited guests. So it was an event that was done for Doug to thank him for funding this gallery. It was a major contribution. And then we had to close for HVAC. So when we reopen in spring of 25, we will be able to open the gallery to the public.
It's a beautiful space.
It's a phenomenal space.
And the paintings, the way they're lit, you see them they glow.
The lighting system is state-of-the-art. We had a really wonderful lighting designer from Seekonk, actually East Providence. And she looked at the space and came up with this stellar system. And it just goes to show that you really need to deal with experts for whatever it is you're doing. We saw a lighting system at the Cooper Hewitt, really liked it, thought it would be ideal in that room. I was sold on it. And she came in, looked at the space, looked at the lighting system, and said, no. And then explained all the reasons why. And I was glad she told us that. And so at that point, it was like, okay, tell us what we need. And she was spot on. In fact, she has just designed a lighting system for a new gallery we're putting in on the second floor as well.
That's amazing. Yeah. It's a really great space. So you have also a wall now between the two parlors, correct?
The room was somewhat limited because of wall space.
Right.
And there were these massive, really beautiful pocket doors, but they took up a tremendous amount of wall space. One wall in the room has been screened. A petition has been put up in front of the pocket doors on that side, so you no longer see the pocket doors from the gallery side. However, they're behind the screen and fully intact, and nothing has been altered. If you go into the parlor in the back room, you do see the doors as they originally were. By doing that, we picked up 14 feet of running exhibit space in the front room.
That's amazing.
Which is transformative.
That's a lot.
It is.
You will still have the parlor exhibit with the period furniture.
Yes, we'll still have period room sittings throughout the house to tell the story of the house,
right.
But we'll also have galleries and new exhibit spaces designed specifically for specific exhibits.
Including Fall River Line upstairs.
Fall River Line, yes. So, and that was a grant actually that was through Massachusetts Office of Travel and Tourism. And that's going to be a stellar space when it's finished.
Because it was there, but it was funny because I went up there one time, I guess during a Christmas party here one Christmas, and I was like, oh, look, I never went in this room before.
The paintings are magnificent. They're fall-of-line steamers by Antonio Jacobson or Fred Pansing, who were two of the preeminent 19th century marine painters. They're major, major paintings, and we have one of every ship in the line, but they were hanging so high you could not see them. So the space is being redesigned so that the paintings can be brought down to eye level, and then exhibits can be specifically designed around each ship and tell the story of that vessel, but you'll be able to actually see the paintings.
And the Lizzie Borden room is going to undergo a transformation
It
as
is.
well.
It is. I'm not sure when that will happen because we're still trying to obtain the funding to do that. It's going to be pricey. It's certainly going to be an expensive renovation. But yes, there are plans to redesign that room completely to tell the story. We have to work within the confines of the space, but we can tell the story in a much more coherent fashion.
In a climate-controlled, well-lit room.
In a space specifically designed to tell the story.
Perhaps
yes.
a chronological way,
yes.
even. Not
yes.
just about her ordeal, but about her life.
Yes, so we could incorporate text and artifacts and photographs and manuscripts at a completely different level. So it would definitely be kicked up several notches.
If someone had been here before and had already seen the Lizzie Borden collection, this would be a whole new experience.
Yes, because there are a number of items that could be brought out that have not been exhibited in the past, or reproductions of which could be brought out that would help to tell that story.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
great. I'm sure the listener's interested in that as well. But you have the Fall River Room, you have Lizzie Borden, you have an art gallery, you have period rooms in the house itself.
Yes.
Textiles.
Well, there are so many stories of Fall River that haven't been told because we've not had the space to do it. So Fall River and the Underground Railroad and various things like that are all stories we plan to tell, but they have to be told in specifically designed spaces.
Right. So this morning when I came to interview you, you had me look up from the stairwell. And I saw something I'd never seen before. And I thought maybe it was because I just don't look around or look up all the time. I mostly look down or straight ahead. But when I looked up, I saw this glorious thing. What was I looking at?
So it's a skylight, a stained glass skylight that's original to the building. It has been there since 1870. But no one has ever really noticed it since the house has been open as a museum. Originally, when the house was built, this stained glass skylight was installed. It may well be sandwich glass or Mount Washington glass made on the Cape, which would be typical of that period. Originally, it was protected by a large glass plate in the roof, so it was illuminated by natural light. At some point in its history, the roof on the building was replaced and it was covered over. So it was in complete darkness. If you were on the third floor, or if you looked up, you could see that there was stained glass there, but it was never illuminated, so you had no sense as to what it actually looked like, what the colors, the true colors actually were. So again, as part of this project, since so much work was being done, we were able to obtain the funding to have that panel removed, sent it out to a stained glass conservator, had it cleaned and conserved, had it illuminated electrically. So we now just simply flip a switch and you can see the stained glass as it originally was intended to appear.
And the roof is still covered.
Yes, yes.
So the lighting is above the stained glass.
It's electrical lighting above the stained glass.
It was spectacular.
Oh, and it looks,
and it's
just
such an unusual shape too. I mean, it's
oval. It's this oval shape, and
enormous
it
oval,
fits.
which matches the oval appointments around it.
Yes, the whole upper portion of that ceiling above the staircase was designed specifically for the installation of this skylight. And now, I mean, just from the first floor when you look up, it's just really lovely.
And you've had the cupola restored?
The interior of the cupola has been completely restored. And then in the spring of 2025, thanks to funding from the Community Preservation Committee, the exterior restoration of the house is going to begin. That project will actually start in the fall, just in a few weeks. But as part of the funding that we received from the Mass Office of Travel and Tourism, we were able to have the interior of the cupola restored. The original gas lighting fixture has been restored and is on a sensor, so it does light up at night. So it's going to be a beacon sort of on the top of the house.
That's great.
Amazing.
What about the tea room? Any plans for opening teas in the future?
So the tea room will not be open this season, so it will not be open in 2024 simply because
it's
could not.
Storage now.
It's packed.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a tea bag, let alone a chair to sit someone at. So it's packed with, boxes and display cabinets and things from the shop, and so it's just packed with material. So stuff. which cannot yet come back to this building because work is still ongoing here. So
where it's going to end up going to go.
Exactly.
Will the tea room become a library?
We have no set plans yet, so things have to remain very fluid for the time being.
They always have been.
They always have been, and as we sort of figure out the best, path forward, it's sort of, we
see the fact that you have been doing this for 35 years and you're not stuck in your ways and you're not envisioning things as it has to be, as opposed to things that it could be.
Well, you have to look at what it could be,
but
and what it
not
needs
everyone's
to be.
like that.
Well, change is good. So change is a good thing, and for the collections and for the organization, there has to be change. And
but
so
a
we
different
have to,
person might have approached this entirely differently.
Yeah, I mean, you could be stuck in the mud and then be, sort of set in your ways. And I'm set in my ways certainly to a certain level, but as far as the collection and the organization, there has to be change. I mean, you have to progress and move forward. Otherwise, what's the point? I mean, if you can no longer do that, then it's time to leave. So.
It seems like you're very nimble about the opportunities. You look at the problem as an opportunity to do something fresh.
If you can obtain the funding, I mean, the sky's the limit. I mean, we do at some point have to expand the facility. We know that. I mean, we know what the collections are. The collections continue to grow.
What do you mean by expand the facility?
Well, the building is too small for the collections that are in it. At some point, we have to think of maybe an addition or another building on the grounds or another building close enough to the Historical Society that they could be linked or joined. So all of these things have to happen sometime down the road, but you have to secure the funding first to do it. The goal now is to work on this building and the collections and ensure that we have the facility at the level it needs to be, and then ensure that we have enough of an endowment to endow what we have before we talk about something else. It's sensible and practical.
Structurally, there's still some changes that are still going to happen in the future. Something about the roof?
We do have to begin the exterior restoration on the building. We did obtain funding through the Community Preservation Committee for exterior restoration and roof replacement on the building, and that would have commenced a couple of years ago. But when we obtained the funding for the HVAC system, we had to put everything on hold because the HVAC system had to be accomplished first. The reason being that in order to vent out the system, there were penetrations that had to go through the roof. So since there were penetrations that had to go through the roof, it made sense to make those penetrations in the existing roof and then have the roof restored around those penetrations.
Did the HVAC system necessitate any changes to the windows?
No changes to the windows were necessitated by the HVAC system, but we did make some changes. For example, from the exterior, all the windows will look the same. But on the interior, we've installed interior storm windows that do a number of things. And these are specifically designed for historic structures. They are very streamlined, so you hardly see them. They're a tension-based system, so they can be removed for cleaning. But they're installed on the inside of the building. They'll make the HVAC system that much more efficient. They'll block out drafts. They're also UV filtered, and they'll also keep things considerably quieter than they have been in the past.
That was weird.
Things like that happen all the time. No, that door, it springs back and forth on its own. They have to readjust the tension on the shutters. So if someone closes a door downstairs, it's not a ghost.
Speaking, the door just opened all by itself, by the way. That's why I was reacting. People who believe in the paranormal talk about the idea that once you start doing renovations in a building that's old, it somehow disturbs things. And then the spirits come active and they start going through spaces where there used to be a door and there's no door any longer, or they become active because they're upset with change. Has anything like that happened here?
No, unless they're dust spirits, no. So, no. And I think the spirits would be absolutely delighted. They're much more comfortable. They have
climate controlled.
They're climate controlled. They have nice ambient environment, and so everything is good.
And everything's cleaned and fresh again.
Well, it will be. Right now, everything is dusty for the most part, but
but it will be.
It will be. Yes.
Spanking new.
Oh, the entire building. So
I mean, just the idea of those chandeliers being polished.
That was a very involved process. Every
knew?
lighting fixture had to be taken down, and we knew that the majority of them had never been cleaned. Certainly they'd been dusted, but they had never been professionally conserved. And you have to remember that these are, bronze or bronze finish or silver plated lighting fixtures or gilt lighting fixtures, and they've been exposed to dust and dirt and insects, and of course insects leave droppings in little spots that build up on.
In a space that has no air conditioning.
In a space that has no air conditioning, but also remember that they burnt coal in the furnaces, so all of that soot, would have built up on these lighting fixtures. Since they were down, we knew they had to be rewired. If they're going to be rewired, it makes sense to have them conserved.
Were they always electric?
No, most of the fixtures in the building were gas and then later electrified.
They were changed at one time and now they've been...
The house was originally wired, as best we can tell, at least partially, about 1906, 1907 is when they first introduced some electricity into the building. And at that point, they either installed gas and electric chandeliers that burned gas and electricity both, or electrified the gas chandeliers.
This building was originally on Columbia Street.
3/4 of a mile south, built on Columbia Street, moved here in 1869-70.
Was it the same design with the mansard roof at the top and the cupola?
No, the house on Columbia Street was a 2-story Greek Revival with a slight pitch to the roof. There's still some evidence of that. If you look at each corner of the building, in the granite, you can see the columns. When they moved the house here, Mr. Remington, who moved it, Robert Knight Remington, wanted a much grander house. So he had the structure disassembled, moved, reassembled, but added what they called a French roof, or the mansard roof, on the 3rd floor, and then expanded the house by adding a kitchen and servant's wing in the back of the house.
Isn't there a story about why mansard roofs were so popular at one time?
So the mansard roof was, Jules Sardin Mansart was the court architect, I think, to Louis XIV, wasn't he? And so he developed the first mansard roof, and then they were very popular during that sort of French Second Empire period.
So I've never been up to the 3rd floor. I see you hopping up those stairs, going up there all the time in the past, but I've never been there. And every time I'd ask, say, Dennis Bennett, take me to the 3rd floor, he goes, oh, you don't want to go up there. It's hot and it's packed with stuff and you have to wend your way around. No, you really don't want to go up there. And I was like, yes, but I do want to go up there because I'd just like to see what's up there. And so finally today I got to see it. It is not packed with stuff right now, although portions of it are.
Yes.
But it is a full floor to the house that you have plans for.
Right. Well, there are 4 main rooms and then small sort of ante-rooms off those. And then
Were
the
they
central
bedrooms
hallway.
originally?
Originally bedrooms. They're bedrooms. That area has been used for storage for years. It was open to the public at one time, but because of fire code, it isn't able to be open to the public. And we also have to have storage space in the building. So again, since the building is empty, this is the ideal time to reconfigure those rooms specifically to suit what is going to be stored in those rooms, since they're now climatized. So, for example, there's one room in which we store furniture. As part of this project, we were able to obtain funding to have the room refitted with racks built on 2 levels to maximize the storage space so we can store furniture in that room, but now we can store double the furniture in the room that we would have been able to otherwise.
You have a room that has boxes of fabrics. Goes straight to the ceiling.
Historical Society has a very large costume and textile collection. And textile storage, costumes, depending on the period and how fragile they are, have to be kept in very long, large, acid-free boxes stuffed with acid-free tissue. They take up an enormous amount of horizontal space and vertical space, actually. We sort of adapted stock shelving to make it work over the years, but we can no longer do that. The plans are to have those rooms reconfigured with specifically designed shelving that will maximize the space. We're hoping that currently what takes 2 rooms, we will be able to get down into 1.
So you'll have a fabric storage space, you'll have a furniture storage space, and a paper storage space?
We do have downstairs in the library and archive photograph and some paper storage. There's another room on the 3rd floor, which just last week we obtained the grant funding to have that room completely refigured. And that'll be for artifacts in the Historical Society collection, 3-dimensional objects, and then some paper as well.
So you say all the way through this conversation, we obtained the funding, we got the grant for. Now, people don't just knock on your door and say, here's some money. How?
I wish they did.
They could, but that's usually not how it works. When you say we obtained the funding, that means you wrote the grant.
Yes.
That asked for the money,
yes.
And then you received the money.
Yes.
So your job as the curator is also this massive fundraiser for projects and the society itself.
There's a lot of fundraising and a lot of grant writing that goes with it, as well as collections management. We have a small staff, and they've been great and have worked on these projects, and to some extent have worked on the grants as well. But no, very rarely does someone knock on the door and say, I'd like to give you an HVAC system. So, or I'd like to, rewire your building. So it does not work that way.
Can you imagine?
No, no. So there's a lot of grant writing, and you don't always
and
obtain
it's
the
done
funding.
in-house, though. It's done in-house, right?
Oh, we do not have a grant writer. I mean, it's
so
all
none
done
of this
in-house.
money goes off to someone else's pockets because they wrote the grant for you, like some organizations do.
No. And there are a number of donors who, of course, frown on paid grant writer. No, everything is done in-house by the staff, and with the endowment, we have a really wonderful committee that's working on obtaining funding for the endowment. We have a couple of heads of that committee and a very active working committee. They deserve a tremendous amount of credit for that part of it.
That's amazing. Did you come to this position 35 years ago knowing how to do that? Or is this...
You just sort of have to figure a lot of it out as you go, right? I mean, we know what we need, and you have to find the funding, and then you have to find the time in the day to write the grants to obtain the funding, or make the contacts with the individuals who can help you raise funds.
You should teach a master class of grant writing.
A historical society such as ours, you have to wear a lot of hats because there's so much that has to be done. You either do it or you don't. There really are no alternatives. It's not anything remarkable. You just do what you have to. And sometimes it comes to fruition and sometimes it doesn't. So when it doesn't, then you find some other way to make it come to fruition. In
the future, we have a clam boil in October. It's sold out, correct?
Clam boil is sold out, and the clam boil is something we had to stop doing during COVID. And those are they're fundraisers on a small level, but they're fun and people enjoy them. And so we have a committee that runs those and manages those. So.
And we have the Mrs. Brigham Award is finally going to happen again.
The last Florence Cook Brigham Award was done in 2019.
And who are the recipients?
Douglas Hills Borden Jr., who lives in Virginia, and Doug is the gentleman who funded the Borden Gallery and has also built a really amazing collection of paintings in memory of his wife. So that's an ongoing project. And also Carol Fiola,
who has secured funding as well for the society through the state.
Carol has helped over the years on a number of levels. So Carol is, one of the Historical Society's biggest cheerleaders. She's done a tremendous amount of work for the Historical Society, but the Brigham Award also recognizes people for the work that they do outside of the Historical Society.
Exactly.
So in areas of preservation and education, et cetera.
Right. So Jim Souza, for instance, with the Preservation Society, was also honored.
And Jim was honored for his work with the Preservation Society and the Historical Society.
And Al Lima, same thing.
A number of other levels, Al Lima as well. So they're all very worthy. And it's just fitting to recognize people for what they do in the community.
Exactly, because there's so many people who do so much for Fall River.
And sometimes very quietly. And
yes.
And that's a good thing. And it's fitting because Mrs. Brigham operated the same way. So
very quietly and precisely.
Yes.
And I never met her, I'm afraid.
Yeah, she was a great lady. So,
is there an opportunity for some of her insights into Fall River to ever be published?
There is, and it's sort of interesting. So recently I came across a cassette tape. It was an interview and then a tour that Mrs. Brigham did of the Historical Society years ago that I think we could do something with at some point.
Ooh.
And Mrs. Brigham also, at my urging for years, did write the reminiscences of her life. And it's not a particularly extensive manuscript, but it's an interesting one. And it's pure Mrs. Brigham. And so there were 4 copies, one for each of her children and one for me. And mine came with a note that says, Michael, not to be quoted from until I am gone. So we did not quote from it until she was gone. And so I've been working with that for some time and at some point would love to publish that.
Are there other literary projects in the works?
There are. I mean, there's the ongoing project, which we've been working on for a number of years, is a commission project for the Charlton Charitable Trusts. And that's a history and general biography of Earl Perry Charlton and his legacy of philanthropy and his founding of this chain of 5 and 10 cent stores that ultimately merged with F.W. Woolworth. So it's an incredible story. And there are a couple of other projects we're working on as well. So
there are 2 volumes of the discourses so far. So is there a third one?
We started before all hell broke loose, and we started these HVAC projects. And really, during the beginnings of COVID, we did start work on another volume of discourses on history, and we have to revisit that because that's sort of well on its way to being made ready for publication as well.
You also have some ideas for a Lizzie photo book, correct? Sort of.
Sort of. I mean, there are so many collections that could be published in their entirety. So the Hip Bath collection, for example, there's this really fabulous collection of letters and notes and cards that Lizzie sent to a particular family over a period of nearly 20 years that we have in the Historical Society's collection that have never been published in their entirety. So there are a number of things that can be done. It's just a matter of time and funding and staff, and there are lots of irons in the fire. So,
and then my pet, the Hilliard collection.
The Hilliard collection, which we started, it is now, of course, in storage along with everything else. So, that's another project. And there are some other things that can be done at some point, but,
Does the Phillips collection have enough in it that it can be a book by itself?
So the Phillips collection is primarily photographic material.
Okay.
And they're fascinating, and they're for the most part dated, and we know what exhibits they were in the trial, if they were exhibits. So that could definitely be published as well.
So maybe even a collection of just the trial exhibits.
Oh, there are a number of things that could be.
I think people would really enjoy that.
And there's still material in private collections. I mean, when it comes to Lizzie, as and we've had this conversation before, but there's still material in private collections that belong to people who have decided that the time is not yet right for them, for various personal reasons, to make that material public. So at some point, I think there'll be some interesting things new.
So when people have research questions and they commission the society to help answer that question through the online form, through the website, where they're charged either a member fee or a non-member fee in order to have that research accomplished. Those materials to accomplish that research have been sealed up tight and locked away. But are you beginning to be able to start addressing some of these research needs?
Not yet, but we will be. So as soon as we are able to open the shop and the offices that are being moved, the next phase of this plan, the next thing we're planning on doing is to open the library and archive. But it's not a matter of saying, turn the lights on and we're open.
Right.
Everything that had to be moved and packed and stored has to be unpacked.
Moved and unpacked and stored.
Again.
Yes.
But at the same time, since these rooms are empty, we're reconfiguring some of them to maximize the storage space so that we can then store more materials. The reason that's so important is if you can store the materials properly, you can catalog them, and most importantly, you can access them. Accessibility has been a problem for the Historical Society for decades because things are stored in boxes because we do not have the proper storage facilities to house the items in the collection. As part of this ongoing project, we're trying to create that space.
That's another big thing that's been done in the background of all of this.
Yes.
You've been cataloging everything that you've got.
Yeah, so for example, there were over 30,000 index cards that were biographical references in file cabinets. And they had some biographical information, but also references to different items in the collections pertaining to those people. All of that information has been put into our museum software program, which has what are called people files. So it's biographical files for each of these individuals. So once that information is keyed in, when we catalog objects in the collection, you can then link those objects to the person they pertain to. So for example, when the entire collection is cataloged, if someone came in and said, what do you have in this collection that belonged to my great-grandmother, Stephanie Corey, we would simply go to...
You'd say nothing because she's not from here.
But if she had been, let's say. So we would simply say, we would look at Stephanie Corey's file, and it would tell us every item in the collection. It is so involved a system that if there is a list in a program of 20 patronesses for an event, all 20 of those women can be cross-referenced and linked.
What about those mill records?
The mill records can be cataloged the same way. The thing is, you do have to go in and you have to research the individuals to make sure you have the right person. And that sometimes gets difficult when you have
1,000 Patrick Sullivans.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For example, with church records, we've done a lot of work with the church records and have cross-referenced those. With the mill records, a lot of the Durfee Mills accident reports, Durfee Mills employment cards, Troy Cotton and Woolen employment cards, all of those have been entered in that fashion.
Oh, that's
so
amazing.
This is just ongoing. If we had a room with 20 people working round the clock, there is enough archival work here to keep them going for years to archive and catalog the entire collection.
Wow. And while you've been closed, people still donate things.
Oh, people still donate. I mean, we obviously are much more selective now than ever because space is an issue. So we have to be sure that the items either upgrade existing collections or augment the Historical Society's collections in some way.
It's not a duplicate, in other words, unless it's a better version of.
Exactly. And so it's not a matter of, well, thank you very much for, your grandmother's dining room chairs. We don't need your grandmother's dining room chairs. We have to be sure that the item documents a portion of the city's history or documents a group of individuals that are not otherwise documented in the collection. So,
but that includes all strata of society.
Across the board.
Right.
I mean, across the board.
We're not just talking about the people who lived on the hill. We're talking
about those days are long gone.
Well.
The material that's coming into the Historical Society collections now and the material we're most actively collecting, represent a completely different segment of society. I mean, Fall River was built on the backs of its laborers, right? And those are the people that you want to document, the immigrant classes that came in. So it's a much more inclusive collection by far than it ever was.
And this is the only place where this exists. This is the history of the city of Fall River within these walls.
It's the only place in Fall River where anything like this exists. Yes.
Because history matters.
Exactly. And so the collections are being expanded on a variety of levels. For example, Doug Borden, who funded the gallery, has been contributing funds to the Historical Society on various anniversaries or special days that he shared with his late wife, Joan, who was an absolutely lovely woman. He has contributed funds, and so we've built the Joan Louise Goodrow Borden Memorial Collection of paintings by either Fall River artists or artists who had some connection to Fall River. And it's a magnificent collection of museum quality pieces, and it's growing at a remarkable rate.
Just from the largesse of the donations that you've received.
Yes.
It's not something that you could go out and afford to buy just because
you wanted. We certainly could not do it because we don't have an acquisitions budget. We can only make acquisitions when contributions are specifically given for that purpose. So the majority of the collections are still donated. But if a significant piece comes up at auction and we have the funding to acquire it, then we try to do that.
The individual donors, the anonymous masses of people who contribute to the society and create the possibilities of the growth of the collection, you couldn't do without that.
No. And so, just week before last, I had a phone call from a gentleman in California who has been a member of the Historical Society for a long time, and he contributed the funds for all the interior storm windows for the L, or the back of the house, the addition on the back of the house, what would be the museum shop and the rooms on the second floor. And so it's not a
pretty donation in terms of people are going to notice.
It's going to make a tremendous difference.
But it's going to make a difference, right?
And so he contacted me a couple of weeks ago and said, look, it's getting toward the end of 2024. I'd like to make another contribution. What do you need? The last piece was I needed the funding for interior storm windows for the large bay window in the parlor on the first floor, the windows in the dining room, and then in the library, which is where the Borden exhibit. So every once in a while,
some money does come knocking on your door.
Well, he contacted and said, he does a contribution every year. What project do you need to fund? So fortunately, there was a project that needed to be funded. He was interested in it, and he funded that project. Now, it's certainly, as you say, not glamorous. It's really difficult to get donations for infrastructure. People like to have their names on things. Fortunately, the majority of donors that we've worked with don't want their names on things. They just want to see the projects done.
They believe in the project. They believe in the society.
Yes.
And
there are naming opportunities. I mean, there's no doubt.
Right.
There are plenty of naming opportunities as well, and that's a good thing. But you don't want to put your name on HVAC system or on electrical wiring. I mean, where no one's going to see that.
Right.
That's the thing. I mean, the things that we've been doing for the most part
are things
that are they're invisible. I mean, they're all sort of
structural invisible that nobody will notice when they walk in the door.
Well, you're going to notice it when you walk in because that stuffiness is going to be gone. It was really interesting when the system was first fired up late spring. Enough of the system was installed that they could make it operational. And they needed to make it operational while the walls and things were still open so we could be sure that the everything was functioning properly and there were no leaks. And of course, now it's being changed from cooling to heat. Some areas still have to remain open so that we can make sure everything's functioning properly, or also the engineers and contractors can. And within days, hours actually, of that system being fired up, the fact that there's constant fresh air being brought in and circulating was an absolute game changer. It was noticeable within hours, which is amazing.
It is amazing. I mean, I remember the days of stuffy shopping on the first floor.
Those days are, long.
Just,
they're
there's
gone
too
now.
many people in there. I'm not walking in that
Exactly,
space. It's
exactly.
too much heat being
Yep.
radiated
Yep,
from
no.
human bodies.
Yep.
That's amazing.
It's
Such a good success story.
It definitely has been the most, transformative period in the 103
and coming on the
history.
heels of COVID, when people were used to not coming for a while because of the situation, that it was the perfect opportunity to
It
make
was the
all this
perfect
happen.
opportunity. And as I said, a lot of people have said, well, we miss Christmas and why aren't you open? And, well, it's impossible to do all of this work while the building is open because we had to empty out the entire building. And the number of contractors representing different trades who were working in this building at any one time from October of 2023 up until quite recently was mind-boggling. They were everywhere. They were like ants all over the building. And this was ongoing every day. We were here at 6:30 in the morning, and it went on every day. And everything they did was dusty and noisy and disruptive. But they were great. The contractors were phenomenal. They respected the building. They were great to work with. We had this really good sort of symbiotic relationship going and did a phenomenal job.
That's great.
Yeah, we've been very fortunate.
Well,
I mean, COVID was crippling for a lot of organizations, understandably so.
right.
It had the reverse effect for the Historical Society. It really sort of ushered in a renaissance in a lot of ways, and that's a good thing and a remarkable thing, I think.
Well, it's a tribute to your ability to look at a problem and see the challenge and then look at the possibilities.
Well, and the ability of a lot of people. I mean, we have an incredibly supportive board, and they've been behind these projects all the way. And so we have got great volunteers. We've got a great staff, small staff, but a great staff. So things have been working out okay.
That's great.
It is.
That's a good story. It's a success. So I want to thank you very much for this update. And I hope that calms the fears of people who are saying, where's my Christmas? Where's my Christmas party? Where's my clam boil? Where's my concerts in the park?
Yeah, and we are going to have a Christmas party for the Historical Society members. We did it last year out of the building. We'll be doing that again
a reason
this year.
to join.
Yep,
Yes.
there you go.
So please, I want to push the membership because I think that it's inexpensive to become a member of the society. It's not that you get so much back. It's that it's such a gift that makes a difference.
It makes a huge difference.
And it enables the society to stay open in ways that otherwise you would have to restrict.
Right, and it gives people the opportunity to be part of what's going on. It would be
the
very
lecture
difficult.
series. Any plans?
So again, during COVID, we had to stop doing the lecture series, and so I think in 25 we'll see a lot of these things coming back. So
That's great. I know a lot of people have been asking about that too.
yeah, and again, a lot of it was
And no one's getting younger.
no, but it was also a matter of space and time and planning and funding, and
Yes.
it's just one more ball to juggle. And so there had to be priorities.
Exactly.
The priority was infrastructure. It had to be, because that is going to have the most lasting long-term effect on the organization
And then
the
you can
collections.
slowly add back in various events.
Yes, and I think when we reopen in spring of 25, it will probably just be the first floor. But the changes to the first floor, maybe a lot of them are subtle. But for example, just the restoration and conservation of the lighting and the gallery and the carpeting that has been replaced and the walls that have been repainted, the new lighting, all of this will have a pretty dramatic effect on the interior of the building and the experience. And that's what it's all
redesign
about.
of the shop as well.
Yes.
And it's important to remember that, you can do your Christmas shopping all here at the Fall River Historical Society, as
there's
I do.
a diverse selection of merchandise. And so we did go up to a gift show and apparel show in New Hampshire in early August. and did some ordering. That stock is coming in. So we will have candy and, McCor's candy back this year. Not an enormous selection, but certainly a very ample selection. So,
which will sell out very quickly. So you got to get your hands on that right away.
Yes,
as it always does.
It always does. So
it always does. Are they packaged in the boxes again?
They will be.
So bring back those memories.
Yes.
Oh, you're also working on. I forgot to mention this earlier. You're working on an oral history of that.
Yes. So that was another ongoing project that's sort of been put on the back burner temporarily. And this was an oral history, and there will be an online exhibit and I think a book documenting the history of the R.A. McCor Company, which was Fall River's iconic department store that was in operation for 90 years.
Everybody has memories of that place.
Oh, everybody has memories of McCor's, and certainly it's a name that Stephanie has a particular difficult time
saying out
loud.
That's why he made me say it just now.
We've struggled with this for years.
That's because I was trained to say it by someone else.
So we have a team of people that have been working on this. And one of the things they did, which was remarkable, is identified a number of individuals still living who were connected to the original management of McCor's. Also people who worked at McCor's. And one of the women was, I think, 100 years old. So
wow.
So she could go way back. And so all of those oral histories are, in the can. That's all done.
Just like working with women at work.
Exactly, like women at work. And then also spoke to a number of people who shopped at McCor's. And so that's going to be an interesting project.
The Santa Claus in itself is a huge thing for people.
Huge thing. It's a huge
And they all
story.
have their family photos of
Exactly. And we're still, the one thing, we have lots of material from McCor's. A lot of our shelving and store that we use in our storage areas was warehouse shelving from McCor's that came to the society when the store closed. And the one thing that we're looking for but have never been able to locate is the Santa chair from McCor's.
Who has it?
So
come
we
forth.
know exactly what it looked like.
Come forth.
And I find it hard to believe that it's not out there. And that Santa chair has sort of an interesting Lizzie Borden connection. So
what?
So the collection of letters that we have that Lizzie sent to the Thelen family.
Yes.
Mr. Thelen was a Swedish gentleman, but he was a wood turner and cabinet maker. And he had a factory or a shop in Fall River that turned posts. So a lot of the posts you'll see on porches, tenements in various houses in Fall River, probably were turned by him because he turned a lot of them in Fall River. He did some work for one of the families that were one of the principals of McCor's, and they mentioned that they needed a new chair, and so for Santa, and so they commissioned him to fabricate the Santa chair.
Oh my!
So he fabricated the Santa chair, and his two daughters called Lizzie Auntie Borden because the families were so close.
What a connection!
So there you go.
It isn't even 6 degrees of separation.
There you go.
It's 1 degree.
Exactly.
So you're looking for the chair. So if anybody out there has it, give the society a call. The telephone number's online.
Right, and we'll know if it's the chair or not because we have lots of photographs.
That's great. What a happy story to end with. Thank you so much for letting me talk to you today about
thank you, Stephanie.
What's been happening at the society. It's a long story in a short amount of time.
And it's been a long process, and it's still ongoing. So
yeah, but some of the weight has been lifted off your shoulders.
It has.
And now we go forward.
Yeah, I think the worst of it hopefully is behind us. The sort of heavy, destructive part is behind us. So
yes.
Yeah.
So thank you again, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Lizzie Borden Podcast, episode 32. We've been talking to Michael Martins on the progress of the recent major structural projects that have been going on at the Fall River Historical Society and the short and long-term plans for the organization. Find Richard Barron's Lizzie Borden Girl Detective stories at Amazon.com and at LizzieBordenGirlDetective.com, where you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Listen to more Lizzie Borden podcasts on our website or on Podbean, Audible, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and YouTube.